Hey everyone, it's Mrs. Hale, and I am going to go over Period 2 information with you. Now, Period 2 is 1607 to 1754. As a heads up, I am going to go through a couple different videos within Period 2. The first one doing a web, the second one, or maybe even part of this one, doing the Spanish, French, and Dutch. And then I'm going to save England for this time period because it's kind of a big beast in and of itself. So starting off within Period 2, can divide this into three big ideas that I introduced to you in Period 1, which was the idea of God, glory, and gold. So let's start off with the idea of gold, though. So for gold, you guys should remember that it's not just about the riches, but what it symbolizes, okay? So keep in mind, for gold, you have the different imperial goals. And when I say the different imperial goals, I mean among Spain, France, Holland, England, and what they were going for. But not only do they have different imperial goals, they all had different local cultures. They had different environments, especially in North America. And I'm going to abbreviate North America NO as opposed to my typical like NAT for Native Americans, okay? But they had different imperial goals, local cultures, environments in North America, and as a result of all that, different patterns as well for colonization. Now, they are going to go, gold symbolizes, as I mentioned, not just the riches, but also keep in mind it's your grab for land and the riches, okay? So giving you guys a couple ideas and some examples of the gold, okay, is going to be, and with the locations that I'm talking about, you have England, that basically goes from Massachusetts all the way down to like the Virginias. Then you have Spain, and they're going into California and the Southwest, which I had mentioned in Period 1. And then France is going into like Louisiana or modern day Louisiana and Canada. Now, what is there? Oh, I forgot the Dutch. So the Dutch then are going into New Amsterdam. And New Amsterdam is modern day New York and New Jersey. So like with these examples, the question comes in like, why are they so aggressive for control? So with this question here of why are they so aggressive for control, their big motivation, as you can tell from the theme, is going to be money. So how do they end up looking different given these different locations, the different examples, who's grabbing for land versus riches, that type of thing. So the examples under the motivation for money, like the big idea on this, the gold, if you will, right, is going to be Spain. So Spain and their colonial efforts in the Southwest and setting up their establishments there, and then later on, like in California, the Spanish missionaries and things like that. Then you have, for the Dutch, they are going to really go for the mercantile exchange. And mercantile exchange is going to be where you have goods and you traded with money, as opposed to just like your barter system where you're trading an item for an item. This is going to be actually, I'm selling you the good, you are giving me the money. Then the French are here for the trapping and trading, namely the animals. And then you have England, and their motivation here is going to be the home for religious dissenters. And I'll talk more about them when I actually get into the details of the different colonies, like Massachusetts Bay Colony and things like that. And I'll get a bit into it with the God in this theme here. But England, I'm going to kind of put on hold and do a big segment on England alone. Now, keep in mind the being aggressive for control and the different examples of this. You're also looking at the difference of how did they get the control. And let's talk about the difference in their labor. So for labor, you have the difference going on here of the encomienda. Whoa, where did my screen go? Sorry, kids. You have the encomienda, or slavery, African slavery specifically, or indentured servants. I feel like I spelled that wrong. Or Indians. So who used all of these different forms of labor? So encomienda is going to be Spain in the Southwest, particularly. The African slavery is going to be in the West Indies, like the sugar plantations on the Caribbean islands, and then eventually on the southern plantations. Then we're going to see the indentured servants mainly in the middle colonies. Now remember, the indentured servants are going to be people that perhaps owe a debt, and so then they come over to America and work for several years and pay off their debt through their labor, and then in theory they would be like poor landless freedmen. Okay. And then the Indians, in particular for the labor, is going to be used by the French in the fur trade. So the whole idea behind gold is why are we grabbing for land and riches? Why are we so aggressive for that control? And how are we going to do it? Through the different labor forms. Now keep in mind, the African slavery took over once the indentured servants and Indians proved that we couldn't really rely on them for a labor source. The Indians were decimated, obviously, by different disease, but also they moved and died in war and in conflict. The indentured servants, we eventually why pay for the labor when we can easily enslave the African Americans, or the Africans, excuse me. And so really the African slavery takes over because we can't rely on the next two indentured servants and Indians for labor source. So then my next idea, from gold, we're going to go to God. And the idea with God is that, keep in mind, because you're talking 1607, you're talking to 1754, you're talking this early time period and the land of the unknown in the Americas. And so keep in mind that religion was a constant for people, and it gave us superiority over natives. Now, did the natives have their own religion? Yeah. Or their own form of beliefs? Absolutely. Did we understand it? No. Did we ignore it? Yes. So it was the constant for people, and the idea of the superiority for it. But also religion, we were able to use to kind of understand some of the fears and to justify it and to kind of squash some of our fears, okay? So keep in mind, our religious turning to the fears, right? We have the unexplainable, like the Indian Wars. We have slave revolts, like that resulted in the Barbados Slave Code. We have economic unrest in areas. And some examples of these religious fears are going to be like your Salem witch trials. And keep in mind, the Salem witch trials were going to be like the townspeople versus like the farmers, right? It really, we kind of look at it as religious because it was in a very Puritan society, but it was really more about the economic unrest of the townspeople versus the farmers. Then we also have, within this time period, the Great Awakening. And the Great Awakening is going to be a religious movement that is based on like your own personal guilt, and then relying on salvation and redemption through the church. through God and church. So some people that were key during the Great Awakening were George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards. Now remember, Edwards is the guy that was the one that wrote, we read an excerpt called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Also during this Great Awakening, we have the idea of the new lights versus old lights. Now, the new lights are kind of seeing the way, part of this Great Awakening, like a light bulb is going off, right? So they're the new lights. Versus the old lights that were more stuck in their ways, didn't see the religious changes, didn't want to accept them, that type of idea. So then the last part of period 2 belongs to, if we've talked about God, gold, we are relying now all the way over here on glory. So we have, like, what are we going for? The riches, the land. We have, like, the justification bit, if you will, and, like, our backup on God. And now we're looking at the glory of it all, right? So the glory we are looking at first because glory is profitable for the imperial powers, right? And the colonies turn out to be super profitable with riches, with minerals, with food supply, and being able to grow crops. And so then the profitable colonies, we had to report to the imperial motherland, whether that be Spain, England, Holland, France, whatever. And the imperial motherland always wanted more and more control. And we see their increasing control as we move throughout the decades, and how some of the colonies shift and change, and some of those conflicts that eventually emerge that I'll talk about in period 3, 1754. You're looking at going to go into the French and Indian War, and then ultimately the reasons why the colonists are so upset, and then we rebel. Welcome to the American Revolution. But the imperial motherland wanted more and more control, but keep in mind, they were absentee rulers. They were kind of that attitude of hands off, and they couldn't really, like, directly keep the colonists under their thumbs. So then the second idea of glory is going to be that people wanted to build their legacy. You know, if you think about it, Charleston, South Carolina, named after King Charles. Louisiana, King Louis. So you're looking at Virginia, you're looking at how can we build our legacy to ensure our glory, not only currently, but in the future as well for these imperial powers. But then part of what comes on with this, and it's kind of ironic because you have the old world, Europe, versus the new world, the Americas. And you're looking at then this idea of Enlightenment thinking. It wasn't just the imperial powers that wanted to build their own legacy. You also have the people that are coming to America for different reasons that want their own legacy. And a lot of it is influenced by the Enlightenment thinking. So the Enlightenment thinking is the idea of reason versus tradition. And the reason is going to be like the new, and tradition is going to be more like the old ways of doing things. Now, a lot of it is more based on science versus religion, so that'll cause conflicts as well. But you start to see these new ideas forming in America and having the place to hatch and kind of grow from there. So it covers, like, in the big picture, what is period 2. And I'll do some different segments breaking out period 2 and adding some more depth in next videos.